Hello everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to my How to Create a Manga from Start to Finish series. I finally got my setup, so I'm really happy about that. I worked really hard on this background, so there's something a little bit nice to look at in the background in my video, so I hope you guys like that. And maybe I'll change the posters once in a while or something. I put them on a kind of styrofoam board, so maybe eventually I'll change the posters again. But yeah, I hope you guys like it. So today's video is going to be about story writing and also scripting your story for your manga. And I feel like when you go to do a manga, it's really tempting to just go right into the drawing phase, because I feel like you're so excited to get your story done and excited to get it out there that sometimes you're like, oh, I just want to go draw it. But in fact, it's much better to plan really well first, because you're gonna save a lot of time in the end, and it'll also help your story to be better overall. It'd be really sad if you worked really hard on drawing something, but then you realize, oh, this part doesn't really fit in with my story, so I kind of have to cut it out. You don't want to have to do that stuff and keep writing and rewriting and all that stuff and keep redrawing stuff. So it's much better to just have everything planned out first and have the story planned out and everything. So yeah. So I'm gonna teach you how to write your story for your comic. Again, for story writing and scripting, I think everyone does it in a different way, so I'm just gonna be showing my method. Though I think with story writing there are also certain consistencies which I will teach about, which I think you need to write a good story. So yeah, I'll try to explain that as much as I can, and hopefully it'll all make sense. So yeah, let's just get into it.
Alright, so the first thing I'm gonna start with is just the story outline, or the page breakdown, which is basically when you break down a comic or manga page by page. You say, this thing happens on page 1, and this thing happens on page 2, or etc, etc. And I usually do this before I go to do the script or dialogue or anything else, just because it helps to see the story flow and just makes it a lot easier once I go to write the whole story. So the first way I'm gonna start off this is just write the title on the top. This story outline is for my new manga called Goodbye White Bunny, but the working title at the time was The Black and White Rabbit, and I had changed it a few times. And yeah, so it's okay if you don't have the title right away. You could always have a working title first and then change it later. But yeah, after that you're gonna figure out first how many pages do you want this comic to be. So I feel like it's good to do this because you don't want to go crazy and do a 60-page comic for your first time making a comic, because that's what I did and it took forever to finish it. So if you're a beginner and you haven't made a comic or manga before, I recommend starting with a 4 to 8 page story perhaps, and then as you become more comfortable with it you can go on and do more pages and such. But yeah, I think that is helpful in general. And if you do a short story first, you could always, when you get more comfortable, add on to it later and stuff. So start with this short, if you're just beginning. So after, it's good to think of a theme, which is this part here. I blacked it out because I didn't want it to be too spoilery for the comic I'm doing. But a theme is basically the subject or topic of the comic, and that can be something like good always triumphs over evil, or loving oneself can lead to happiness and self-fulfillment, or something like that. It's just basically the message of the story overall. And it only needs to be 1 or 2 sentences. You don't have to make it too complicated, just something simple is good. And it also gives the story some consistency if you have a theme, so it can be tied up together and doesn't end up being all over the place when you actually go out to write the story. So it's good to write out a theme and then keep it in mind as you're doing the page breakdown. Yeah, there we go. So yeah. So keep the theme in mind as you do that. So after that, you're gonna just do the page breakdown. So you can see I'm showing the first, pages 1 through 5. I'm doing them in spreads, so it's page 1 is the first page, and then page 2 and 3 are next to each other, so I'm writing it in that way, but you can do it at, by individual pages as well. It's not a big deal either way. So this is basically where you just write 1 or 2 sentences describing very simply what's going on each page. You don't need to go into crazy detail now with the dialogue or how the art will look. This is just to show the general flow of the story, basically. Make sure to keep in mind what the beginning, climax, and end of the story look like. And in the beginning, all the characters should be introduced so the reader knows who they're reading about, and also have a general sense of what's going on. So you're like going to introduce like your main characters at the beginning of the story. And then the climax is the point where the whole story builds up to, and it creates a sudden change from which the character's life is changed, or from like where they can't go back. And that's basically like, the why you read the story. It's what the whole story builds up to, essentially. So, for example, in the movie Akira, the climax is when Tetsuo and Kaneda face off against each other in the sports stadium. So, it's like the whole story is building up to that point, and then, like, there's a big showdown kind of face-off. So you're gonna want to think what the climax of the story that you're writing is as well, and, like, what's the big event that happens. So then, after the climax is the resolution, which shows the result of the climax and how the character's life has changed. And it happens at the end of the story. So that's, like, the ending's obviously the part that's gonna wrap up the story and show the results of, like, the climactic point and what happened. So to break it down a little bit more easily, usually, if you're doing a 4-page comic, for example, page 1 is going to be the beginning, where you introduce the character. Page 2 is going to be the rising action, which is also like the point that leads up to the climax, basically. So, yeah, the rising action on page 2. Page 3 will be the climax, and page 4 is the resolution. And if you're doing a 20-page comic, this may break down into the beginning will last until around page 10, lead up to the climax, which is like on page 15 or so, and then the resolution until page 20. This is very, like, rough, though. You don't have to follow that exact formula if you're writing a story, but I just feel like it's easier for me if I break it down in that way. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Just, like, write down your story page by page, just one sentence, nothing too complicated, just do whatever flows for you. And after that, we're gonna go on to do the script. So, I have my script here. This is what you do after you finish the page breakdown and you know what's gonna happen on each page of your manga or comic. And it's good to look at the page breakdown while you do the dialogue and script and, like, everything else. So, for this one I used a script writing program called ChillX. I think that's how you pronounce it. But usually I write most of my stuff in Google Docs just because it's easier to, like, find and keep everything in place. So I recommend that too. So I'm gonna break down the pages. As you can see, I have page 1 here on the top, and then I'll have page 2. And I have them numbered as well, just to make it easy. And I'm gonna describe the different panels and dialogue that go on each page. So, before I go to write the dialogue, I do the panel descriptions. And the way that works is, well, panels, first of all, are different sections of a comic page, which each have a scene or picture in them. And I can put up an example or something, too, to, like, show you guys. But yeah, it's basically like each square on a comic page where there's, like, a different scene happening, that's a panel. So you're gonna figure out, like, what panels you want on your page as well. So yeah, you use this to break down the actions of the story. Try to have maybe between 2 to 8 panels, try to have between, like, 2 to 8 panels a page. You don't want it to get, like, too overcrowded too, otherwise it might be a little bit hard to read. So yeah, I recommend, like, 2 to 8 panels, but, hang on, let me close that. Windows updates are the worst. Okay. But, yeah, you could also do a splash page for your climax, though. I feel like that's pretty common. And a splash is basically where it's, like, a whole full page illustration within your comic. And it kind of emphasizes a scene or makes it more dramatic. It's like a full page illustration with no panels or anything. So yeah, that can be cool to do too. I think it's good to vary the number of panels you have on each page just to make it more interesting too. And yeah, you're just going to use these panels to break down the actions of your story, basically. Go into a little bit detail on, like, what's happening in each panel, the emotions, how it looks, etc. Like, I I have on panel 2, on page 1, Luna is in her Lolita clothes being squished by a crowded subway. She is standing in an open doorway. So yeah, just very, like, simple description of what's going on within that panel or scene. And yeah, you just do that for, like, each panel in your story, basically. And after, or while doing this, you can also do the dialogue. Just use the characters' profiles and sheets you made, that we did in the previous video. And you can try to, you know, just put yourself into your character's shoes. Like, imagine what they would be saying in these situations. I think imagining a voice for your character can be helpful with this in writing dialogue. And I think it's just good to do whatever comes natural for what the characters will say. You can always go back and edit it later if you don't like it, or something sounds awkward, but I think it's good not to overthink the dialogue too much. Just, like, write down what you feel like flows with the characters, and it's okay if you do it quickly, but then afterwards just, like, make sure to go back and read it and edit it later. And I feel like that's the best way to do it, in my opinion. And you can also add sound effects, like I have sound effects here that's like squish. You can do that if you want, or you can do it later. It's not really a big deal either way. I like adding the sound effects in the script usually, but I will also usually add little notes or other things later on as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it for that.
So that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope it was helpful in some way. If you have any more questions, feel free to leave it down in the comments. If you like my posters and stuff, feel free to write me in the comments as well. I'd be happy to hear from you guys. And if you want to see more videos in the series, next I'm going to be doing sketching on how to sketch your manga or comic. So if you're interested in that, feel free to subscribe and like the video as well. And I'll be posting that in the future. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Bye!